The snow fell in soft, steady flakes as James Wright navigated the winding roads of Cedar Ridge. His childhood home, nestled at the base of a hill, stood like a warm beacon, its windows glowing with the golden light of Christmas cheer. He could already hear the laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional off-key carol his family sang every year. For James, the holidays were always a time of comfort. The Wright family was big on traditions, tree decorating, cookie baking, and family game nights that often turned competitive. But this year, things were different. As James pulled into the driveway, he noticed a car he didn't recognize. Stepping out of the vehicle, he spotted his younger brother, Evan, bounding out of the house to greet him, his usual wide grin in place. Evan had always been the life of the party, the golden boy of the family. "James," Evan called, pulling him into a hug. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," James replied with a chuckle. Then James saw her. A petite woman with chestnut brown hair stepped out of Evan's car, her smile warm but hesitant. She held out her hand as she approached. "Hi, I'm Claire, Evan's girlfriend." James froze. The world seemed to tilt. He recognized her immediately. Her almond-shaped hazel eyes, her soft voice, the way she nervously tucked her hair behind her ear. It was Claire. 5 years ago, James and Claire had met at a wedding in the Hamptons. She was a friend of the bride, he a +1 of the groom. Their connection was instant, magnetic. They spent an unforgettable night together, sharing stories, laughter, and stolen kisses under the stars. The next morning, they parted ways, agreeing it was just a moment in time. They never exchanged numbers, believing that they would never see each other again. And now, here she was, holding hands with his brother. James felt a lump form in his throat as he shook her hand. "Nice to meet you," he said, forcing a smile. Claire's smile faltered, just for a moment. "Nice to meet you too." The first few days of Christmas were a whirlwind of activity. The Wright family went all out for the holiday, hanging garlands, preparing the feast, and visiting the town square for an annual tree lighting. Claire fit in seamlessly. She charmed James' parents, played board games with the younger cousins, and even helped his mom perfect her famous apple pie. But James couldn't look at her without being reminded of their past. Late one evening, as the family gathered to watch a Christmas movie, James found himself sitting next to Claire. Their hands brushed as they reached for the popcorn at the same time, and she quickly pulled hers back. "Sorry," she whispered. "It's fine," James replied, his voice tight. But it wasn't fine. The snowstorm hit harder than expected, blanketing the roads in thick, heavy snow. James and Claire found themselves stranded at the neighbor's cabin, the wind howling outside as they sat by the fire. The air was thick with tension, unspoken words hanging between them. James busied himself stacking firewood while Claire curled up on the couch staring into the flames. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Claire finally said, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. James paused, his back to her. "Which part? Showing up here or everything else?" "Both," she admitted, her voice trembling. James turned to her, his expression conflicted. "Claire, you're with my brother. Whatever happened between us is in the past." "Is it?" she asked, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. "Because it doesn't feel like it to me." James sighed, sitting down in the armchair across from her. "We can't do this, Claire. It's not fair to Evan." She nodded, wiping away her tears. "I know, but it doesn't make these feelings any less real." For a moment, silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of the storm outside. As the hours passed, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Their favorite Christmas traditions, memories of past holidays, and dreams for the future. The tension began to ease, replaced by the warmth of shared laughter. But then it happened. Claire leaned forward to stoke the fire, her face illuminated by the golden glow. James couldn't look her way. Her beauty, her vulnerability. It was too much. "Claire," he said softly, his voice filled with warning. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "James," before either of them could think better of it, he leaned in, her lips meeting in a kiss that was unexpected, as it was inevitable. It was a brief but intense moment, a raw emotion that left them both breathless. They pulled apart almost instantly, their faces flushed with guilt. "That shouldn't have happened," James said, running a hand through his hair. Claire nodded, her eyes wide. "You're right, it can't happen again." They sat in silence, the weight of their actions settling over them like a snow outside. When the storm finally passed, James and Claire returned to the Wright family home, both determined to put the kiss behind them. They avoided being alone together, keeping their conversations polite but distant. Claire threw herself into holiday activities, helping James' mom bake cookies and wrapping gifts with Evan. James, meanwhile, focused on spending time with his father and younger cousins, doing his best to ignore the ache in his chest every time he saw Claire with Evan. But the guilt weighed heavily on both of them. Late one evening, as the family gathered around the piano to sing carols, Claire slipped outside for some fresh air. James followed, finding her standing on the porch, staring out at the snow-covered yard. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Claire turned to face him, her breath visible in the cold night air. "I know. I've been avoiding it, but we do. I can't stop thinking about what happened," James admitted. "But we can't let it go any further. It would just hurt Evan. It would destroy this family." Claire nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. I feel the same way. We have to let it go." The Wright family's living room was aligned with the glow of twinkling lights, the scent of pine mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Wrapping paper littered the floor as family exchanged gifts, laughter, and joy filling the space. James sat on the edge of the couch, clutching a small, neatly wrapped box in his hand. His heart raced as he glanced at Claire, who was seated next to Evan on the love seat. She was laughing at his jokes and that his father had just told. Her smile was radiant as ever. He hadn't planned to give her the necklace, but something about this moment, the warmth, the intimacy of Christmas morning, pushed him forward. Clearing his throat, James rose to his feet. Claire," he said, his voice hesitant, "I got you something." The room got quiet. Everyone turned to watch as he crossed the room and handed her this small box. Claire hesitated, her smile faltering. "Oh, thank you, James." Evan's eyebrows knitted together, his gaze flickering between his brother and his girlfriend. Claire carefully unwrapped the box, her hands trembling slightly. When she opened it, her breath hitched. Inside was a delicate silver necklace adorned with a tiny seashell charm. Her face went pale. She stared at the necklace, then at James, her expression a mix of shock and confusion. Evan leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sharp. "It's," Claire started, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at James, silently pleading for guidance. James stepped forward, his throat tight. "It's just a gift," he said quickly, his voice betraying his nervousness. "Just a gift," Evan replied, standing up. His height and presence seemed to dominate the room. "Why a seashell? Why something so personal?" James hesitated, his mind racing for an answer that wouldn't unravel anything. But Evan wasn't done. "Claire, do you know why he gave this to you?" His tone was accusationist. Now, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. Claire opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Evan's gaze snapped back to James. "I trusted you. I trusted both of you," he said, his voice raising. "Evan, it's not what you think," James said, his tone urgent. "Then explain it to me," Evan demanded, his hands clenched into a fist. James hesitated, guilt written all over his face. Evan let out a bitter laugh. "That's what I thought." He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire sat frozen, her eyes wide and glassy. James looked down at the necklace, still clutched in her hands, his chest heavy with regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Claire shook her head, finally finding her voice. "You shouldn't have given me this. Not here, not now." "You're right," James admitted, "but I couldn't help it." Tears filled Claire's eyes, but she blinked them away. "You need to fix this. You need to fix it with Evan." James nodded, his jaw tight. "I will, I promise." But as the morning wore on, the joyful spirit of Christmas was gone, replaced by the cold weight of betrayal and the looming task of mending what had been broken. Evan left the house that morning, telling his parents he needed some space. Claire decided to leave as well, knowing her presence would only make things worse. Before she left, she pulled James aside. "I'm sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt anyone." "I know," James said softly, "but some things aren't meant to be." As she walked out the door, James watched her go, his heart heavy. The holidays ended on a somber note, but over time the wounds began to heal. James reached out to Evan, apologizing for his part in the situation. It took months. Eventually the brothers found their way back to each other. As for Claire, she remained a memory, a bittersweet reminder of a love that couldn't be